right, so that was the OBGYN, Dr. John E. White. He answered questions and was speaking to the possibility that this baby could have been stillborn. One of the things he spoke about was intrauterine growth restriction, or IUGR, which they were referring it to. And that's basically a condition in which an unborn baby is smaller than it should be because it is not growing at a normal rate inside of the womb. And this doctor just said that Skylar's baby did indeed have IUGR. So this is very interesting here. This OB also said that he measured her at 39 weeks and she measured the size of 32 weeks. So the big question here is, does that indicate that this baby was stillborn? Joining me now to break all of this down is Prosecutor Latonia Hines. Latonia, thanks for being here today.
Yes, thank you. We've had interesting testimony today.
Indeed. So talk to us a little bit about this doctor. What's your reaction to this, knowing what he just said about the measurements of her at 39 weeks? And what do you think? Is this good for the prosecution? I don't know.
I don't think that. So here's what happens. You have competing medical experts giving information. And so the jury's going to have to figure out which one they believe to be the better one. And I think here this is problematic for the prosecution, because it lends to the idea that this child was, one, probably underweight. And I thought that the OBGYN did an excellent job explaining the difference between a full-term baby doesn't necessarily mean that the baby's in good health. It just means about the number of weeks. And so I thought that was great. And so then you've got more information from him saying that this child, more likely than not, in his opinion, would have been stillborn because the child had multiple issues going on.
Right, and he went on to talk about that picture. He referenced the photo, which was a picture of her weight on the scale. All right, with me now to talk about all of this, Prosecutor Latonia Hines. You are a prosecutor yourself. What'd you think of those opening statements? Anything you would have done differently?
I think it's very daring to discredit eyewitness testimony. I mean, whether or not you think it is reliable or not, as a prosecutor, I think a lot of times we do have eyewitnesses that sometimes you have to rely on in addition to other circumstantial evidence. And I thought that was a little risky. I thought it was interesting also that he went ahead and basically started explaining that most of their case is circumstantial. And usually you use that for your closing argument. So he seemed to say, look, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about the weaknesses. And so you're not thinking all throughout that you're about ready to get some big, Perry Mason moment. You've just got to be listening to the evidence and be able to, add 1 + 1 together to be able to get the logical conclusion.
Right. And another thing, before we get into more of these opening statements, this is a retrial. For those who don't know, talk to us and explain what happens in a retrial. The first trial ended in a hung jury, so this is obviously a separate jury, a new jury. Walk us through that.
Right. But what you still have is sworn testimony from the previous trial. And so that's important, too, especially if anybody is put back on the stand and that information changes, their testimony changes. You've got sworn testimony that can still be used again. But in the retrial, you try to hopefully learn from the previous trial and maybe having some idea of what you thought the jury was hung up on and trying to see if you can clear that up. And that may be some of the reason why the prosecutor is approaching the case in the way that he is. I'm not quite sure. But in a retrial, it's like your second time to go at it, and hopefully you figured out a little bit about what it is that you need to make sure that is clear for the jury. That's what the prosecutor's looking at.
All right, Latonia, let's go on and listen to more of that prosecution's opening statement. Okay, so more from the prosecution there in those opening statements. He goes on to talk about the 2,093 days that she has been gone. He sort of paints this picture of the relationship between Moorer and Elvis. He talks about the affair, how he was courting her. Latonia, does he do a good job here of depicting this relationship? I mean, he explains it with text messages and says this is how they were communicating. His wife had no idea at the time. What do you think of this part of the opening statements?
It's kind of general. The thing that I think is important, and I guess we'll hear more about it as well, is knowing more about the victim. That she was significantly younger, and hearing more about those details, I think are going to be important for the jury.
Right. And that picture of her up in the courtroom, I mean, how does that hit with a jury, having that photo there, pretty life-size?
Yeah, it's always important when you put a picture of the victim up there, because when you're talking about somebody, it's not as real as when you keep looking. The jury's going to constantly keep looking at there. Whenever he references Heather, they're going to have a picture of her. There's a depiction of her. There's somebody in their mind. So whenever they're thinking, they're always seeing her. I think that's powerful.
Agree. All right, we'll continue to follow this after the break. Stay with us here on Law and Crime.